In this video, we'll discuss the features on Klaus Schwab's face that point to risk-taking, as well as a potentially pessimistic and disappointed nature. Enjoy. In today's face reading, we're looking at Klaus Schwab. A number of subscribers had asked about his face and had asked me to read him. So I believe he was the founder of the World Economic Forum, and I believe very recently he just stepped down because I think he's getting old, essentially. I think he's almost 90 or in his late 80s, somewhere in there. So in any case, I don't know a ton about Klaus Schwab. I've read a little bit, the stuff online. I've definitely seen him in the news. He's a pretty controversial character because the World Economic Forum is a lot of unelected people apparently making decisions for a lot of people. And because they're not elected, that stirs the pot pretty sizably in society, which I think is a fair point. So regardless, let's talk about his features and the things that I saw that were dominant and that I think are worth talking about, at least from an educational perspective. So in looking at Klaus Schwab, there were a few things, what I would say, kind of inauspicious markers, the first things I noticed right out of the gates. One of them being the wrinkles here. So these kind of the frowning lines. People think the frown lines can only show up here, but sort of the inverse spot where it can show up is right here. These are called disappointment lines in face reading theory. So if you think about a smile where the mouth turns up, a frown is the opposite, going the other way. But if you're at home and you try to make these wrinkles show up, you do sort of have to frown the face. And what they say with these lines is they're not auspicious. They're not like a good thing technically. What they say is that the person has a predisposition towards disappointment, sometimes resentment, or being upset about the way things are going. But essentially, in a nutshell, it's sort of a pessimistic or depressed emotional state in the body of the person over long periods of time. Now, again, I don't know Klaus Schwab, haven't done a deep dive into his psychological profiling and whatnot. So again, not the most favorable thing. But the other thing I noticed that was kind of dominant on his face was this very long philtrum. So the space from the bottom of the nose to the top of the upper lip, this area is called the philtrum. This area is related with the water element, related with fertility, and sort of a marker for the overall integrity of the jing system. This is our constitutional strength. It stores our reproductive capacity, how well we age, our sexual energy, and also the water element relates to willpower. So when we see a long philtrum, this is sort of like a jing marker. This is someone who's got a robust constitution usually, and with that can come long-lasting or long-standing power throughout life. Now, that's not necessarily like a bad thing per se. That's not a negative trait, but the combination of where I said things are a little bit inauspicious were these disappointment lines with the hooded eyes and very large ears. In isolation, or in any of the components that make up face reading, you can't look at a single feature and say, well, they have this, therefore it means bad. If I have large ears, I'm bad, or that means I'm the next Klaus Schwab, or any person that I'm talking about for that matter. But when I see disappointment lines with hooded eyes and large ears, this combination, given where the person is in their life terrain, where they've positioned themselves, this would be something that would give me caution. And the reason I say that is because the hooded eyes can be associated with compassion and kindness and sort of like a tender nature that can definitely be there. The other side of that is hiding or white lying or consistently lying. And the reason they say this in face reading, with all features, there's a light side and a dark side. But with this feature, the thing you want to think about is that the eyes are seen as a gateway or a portal to the soul or consciousness of a person. And so when the eyes, the doorway, is hooded like this, that means that a portion oftentimes of the consciousness likes to hide, likes to not necessarily be seen. This can point to introversion. This can point to a lot of different things. And again, you have to assess the person and look at their life train to kind of make sense of these things. But these markers of the hiding eyes, disappointment lines with very large ears, which is associated again with the water element. So the philtrum is part of the water element, but the ears are also. When we see large ears, there's also this capacity for risk-taking. That can be physical risk, that can be sexual risk, that can be financial risk, that can be risky in virtually every context, but it doesn't have to be one or the other. So when I see this from a world leader of sorts, someone who's in a very high position of power, willing to take a lot of risk, potential marker for hiding or not telling the whole truth, maybe, with disappointment lines. That combination together, given the person's positioning in life, I would be like, interesting, not the most favorable in my book, or at least according to face reading, but that doesn't mean you can explicitly judge someone by looking at their features either. That's not the way this works. But again, as the face reader, right here, I have to sort of put those things on the radar and say, yeah, maybe not the best thing. It comes to mind a little bit of when I did the reading of Mark Carney, the Prime Minister of Canada. His face, definitely for the political sphere and what I was seeing and where he was going, at least what he was doing, not the most auspicious markers. If you want to see the Mark Carney face reading, you can go up here and check that out. I'll put a little link up there. So these are sort of the dominant things I noticed about Klaus Schwab. Now, I'll also say that when I'm reading people's faces, what I like to do is I like to find a picture of them smiling, if at all possible. The reason for this is that when a person smiles, you get to see the full expression of the fire element, the full anima of the spirit, essentially. The way they look at it in face reading is that when a person smiles, it's essentially the fire element in high drive. The smile is the expression of fire. Things wrinkle, things contort, they move. It relates to joy and laughter. These are all fire element themes. So interestingly enough, when I was looking at pictures, going to Google Images and just typing in Klaus Schwab smiling, very few pictures came up. It was very hard to find a picture of him smiling. And this picture here, where he's got his hand like that, and this one here were the best pictures I could find of him smiling. Now, this smile also leaves a little bit of room for, I would say, lack of fire, lack of joy. When a person's face doesn't fully light up and beam light when they smile, not favorable in face reading. It's basically saying that the spirit is a bit muted. His smile is a bit muted. It doesn't look genuinely happy. It looks kind of muted and a little dull, I would say, by looking at his face. But that kind of points me to the nature of Shen. When a person smiles, or we're looking at the face, the general countenance, when you sort of average everything out and you're just looking at the face, you're trying to see the impression of the spirit, how the spirit of the person is coming out. Now, if you don't believe in human beings having souls or having some deeper reservoir of something like that, okay, lots of world traditions talk about it. If you don't think of it like that, or you're an atheist or whatever, no judgment. Excuse me. What I'm saying is, though, think of it sort of like the conglomeration or averaging out of a person's psyche and emotional expression throughout life. That's another kind of clinical way to look at it. But when I look at his face, there's something that looks, I don't want to say dark, but it doesn't look happy. It looks drawn, sullen, kind of, I don't know. It's hard to put into words, but there's something about his face that also looks like there's a lot going on inside, and maybe potentially not all of it is great. Those are the impressions I get. Again, I don't know a lot about Klaus Schwab, but I'm just reading the features as I see them. But when I did his natural face, public persona, and inner persona, and I really try to find a picture where there aren't shadows, and I apologize, his inner persona is pretty heavily shadowed. But if you look at the proportions of the width of the nose, the spacing of the eyes, how they present are pretty different. His right side, his public persona, is definitely wider. The eyes are farther apart, which sort of points to this idea that when a person is discoursing in the public sphere, the way they will appear is to have a broader, big view, and they'll be sort of seen as that, a person who looks at the big picture. But when you look at his inner persona, the eyes are noticeably closer, which points to a usually high analytical computing power, sometimes a person who is very detail-oriented and also can be highly critical. So when we see this separation in a person who's in like global power, per se, when they have these things, it's just metrics to pay attention to. It's like, okay, well, this is what the theory says. Now I need to look at how they live. What are their policies? What are they doing? And then you try to make sense of that and see if there's congruency. And from there, in theory, you build out lifestyle guidance. So what's the same in these pictures are the depth of the purpose lines and the disappointment lines. So these nasolabial lines that he has right here are called purpose lines. This is a person who is driven by their purpose or how aligned they feel with it. Now, purpose we could argue for looking at people can be like good or bad, right? This person's purpose is bad in the world or it's good in the world. But the purpose lines really have to do with how the person feels about what they're doing, driven, aligned, and going after what they believe in. And he's definitely got this. So when you see this, these very, carved, hard lines that are pushed here that almost bleed into these lines here, where you see the nasolabial purpose lines kind of bridge into the disappointment lines, this also is not particularly favorable, because what it's saying is the terrain of purpose is also kind of aligning and synchronizing with disappointment and potentially resentment, sort of like a quote-unquote pessimistic worldview or negative view. But like when you see these lines here and then here, these are two deep cuts that are not necessarily very favorable. So again, this is not a video to like slam Klaus Schwab or anything, but I just read the features as I see them. Again, I would have to do a little deeper dive into like who he is and what he does on a larger scale, and like what his stances are on a lot of things. But for what you would call a World Economic Forum political type leader, these features are like not super favorable, at least in my book. But again, I do my best not to completely judge a book by its cover, even though face reading does have a component of that. You are judging a little bit. You're trying to assess, but you're also trying to get an orientation to better understand the person. So that's what I've got for Klaus Schwab today. If any of you have questions, please put them down below. And as always, thank you for your time. Take care.